even though a lot of evangelicals will decry word of faith as being false doctrine, there are still certain things that most of them believe about this anyway, because it gets peppered into other areas of doctrine. These people cared about me. They wanted me to be whole. They wanted me to not be in pain. And these are all great things. They brought some great energy to that little gathering there. But that's all it was. It was good times and good feels, and that was it. This doctrine is all through evangelical religion, especially Pentecostal religion. Anything that has a real mystical edge to it is going to have this in it. You believe this. Where's your $1 million home? Where's your late model car? Where's the money to pay your bills? People hand over their paychecks to these people, sell their cars to meet their faith promises.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle, and it's time to get unbound.
Name it and claim it. Mark it and park it. Whatever you want to call it, it's called Word of Faith, and that is what we are going to be talking about tonight. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle.
And we have extensive experience dealing with this kind of shit. And not just in evangelical Christianity either. This is a concept that has made its way into the mainstream in recent years. Well, semi-recent years.
Semi-recent.
But there are all kinds of secular equivalents to this. We're going to talk about one of them as we go. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Let's talk about our online presences and where you can find us. GetUnbound.org is our website. That's get-unbound.org. You can find us on YouTube and on Facebook simply by searching for Unbound Podcast Network. You will find us both on YouTube and on Facebook that way. And also our Twitter handles, one more time, Unbound_Spider and
Shelle Unbound.
Just all one word.
All one word.
Shelle, Unbound. All one word. And also, if you want to connect with Shelle on her main account,
yes,
she's at, what is it, Witchy Subversive?
That's the name, but you can get me at Shellebell93.
Okay, Shellebell93, Shellebelle 93.
Yes.
The year we got hitched.
The year we got married.
1993. It's been that long.
Yes, it has.
Almost 30 years. That's pretty wild. And also, just a 30-second plug here, our Patreon account is out there, and you can find our links on all of our content on getunbound.org. You can find us on YouTube. All of the links are there. $5 a month will help us out a lot, especially a bunch of people donating $5 a month. It's amazing how that can expand and grow and give us better things that we can do. There's all kinds of things that I'd like to do with this, and it all involves money. And we really appreciate you at least considering helping us out. It's something that will benefit a lot of people, will help us keep getting the word out. And if you personally know people who are stuck in this religion and really need a way out, then this is one thing that you can do to help. It's going to help us reach them, and it's going to help them get unbound. That's all I'm going to say about that tonight. I want to get right into our main topic and start talking about all this craziness. So the Word of Faith movement. This was something that we both had a lot of exposure to. And it was kind of a polarizing thing in a lot of evangelical circles, too. I mean, I can remember talking to my youth pastor about all of this and him talking about all the name it and claim it nonsense.
Right.
And so when your concept is too far out there, even for most evangelicals to be able to get behind, you've got to know how wonky it is.
Yeah.
And the word faith or word of faith, I've heard both. I've heard word faith movement. I've heard word of faith movement.
Right.
It's the same thing, and it's predicated on the same thing. It's all this name it and claim it nonsense. as my youth pastor used to put it. Now, if you are unclear on the types of things that this represents or the types of people that represent it, let's talk about a few people like Joel Osteen, Creflo Dollar, Benny Hinn, Joyce Meyer, Kenneth Copeland, Robert Tilton. Oh, we'll be talking about that guy. We'll be talking about him. Bishop Eddie Long, Paul Crouch. Oh, I got a few things to say about him too. I've met him.
Yes.
I've actually worked at TBN.
Yeah.
For pay and for no pay. I've worked at TBN, and the one really nasty interaction I had with him was when I was there as a volunteer. And I will get to that one too in a little while. Not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it really, I think, kind of encapsulates what these people are like, what they think of themselves, what they think about their own doctrine, how important, how self-important they really are. And it all comes back down to making money. It's all a big grift and nothing more.
Oh, yes.
So, and most evangelicals see it like that.
Yeah.
So, bonus, we actually agree on something here. It can't be all opposition. We have to have some points of agreement. And the vast majority of evangelicals agree that word of faith doctrine is bunk. But if you turn on your TV on the weekends and you see guys like Kenneth Copeland and Joel Osteen in those massive churches, those mega churches with so many people in the audience, well, you know what? Try and understand there's a lot of evangelicals out there. And the word faith preachers are marketing to a specific demo. And they are marketing to the most impressionable, the most easy to intimidate, the most easy to scare. These are the kinds of people that they want to align themselves with because they're the ones that send the money. We are going to get into a lot of what this doctrine is about and how it manifests in a lot of these people's ministries. Now, one of the biggest and probably the central doctrine with word faith is the concept of manifesting.
Right.
And we've heard this word before in other circles too. We're going to talk about some of the other ways that this particular concept is used, but it is foundational to word of faith because the entire word of faith concept is predicated on the notion that we manifest the things we want and need by mobilizing God into action with our words. The idea here is that people can control God based solely on the law of faith. The law of faith is said to make positive answers to prayer mandatory and shamelessly blames the believer if nothing happens.
Oh, yeah.
And that's true. You're shamed into believing that it's your fault if something doesn't happen. Faith in this instance is not a belief that God will intervene, but rather that one can make God intervene through specific metaphysical channels that open up when your faith aligns with what you want. In other words, when you've got enough faith, you can basically make anything happen.
Right.
So what about the 99% that never see anything happen? It's their fault because they didn't have enough faith. And before I go any further, I think that's a really, really good lead into what you were talking about with me a couple of minutes ago about that church that we went to right after we moved into West Springfield.
Yes.
There was that one church that we went to and that one preacher. We've mentioned this on the show before, but I want a little bit more about it tonight.
Yeah. Yes, we had gone to this church a few times, and I was kind of ambivalent about it. You know, we've been to a lot of different churches, and I was a little tired of it. But they had a guest speaker. Wasn't he a guest speaker? Yeah.
Yes, he was a guest speaker. Yeah.
And he was preaching, delivering his sermon, and it was all the name it and claim it stuff. It was all the prosperity and health and wealth things. And he was like really, really pounding the whole, if you are sick, it's because you don't have enough faith and that you don't pray enough and that you don't do enough praying and you don't pray the right way and you don't, all the things that make it your fault that you're sick. And my mom had just died of cancer. And my mom was a very good Christian. She really tried to walk the walk and, she was very kind. She would give you the shirt off her back, literally. And to me, having this person who did not know my mother, I was furious. I was sitting there. This guy went on forever. I could not wait to get out of there. And I was just furious. I don't know if people around me could feel how furious I was, but felt like I was just emitting waves of rage.
You were sitting there just kind of, I don't want to say trembling, but I could tell that you were angry.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell precisely why at that moment in time, but as soon as that guy finally shut the fuck up, I remember you leaning in and saying to me, so basically my mother is dead because she didn't have enough faith.
Yeah.
And I kind of, sort of, I guess, about halfway through, kind of made that connection, but it sort of went out of my head. And I was more concerned because I've heard this stuff so many times. I was kind of impervious to it.
Right.
And I had already learned how to consume the meat and spit out the bones. And he did have some good things to say. He really did. But I mean, he could have said everything that was worth hearing in about 10 minutes, and he went on for about an hour and a half.
Oh, God, it was so long.
And boy, oh boy, you could just tell that this guy loved the sound of his own voice.
Mm-hmm.
Said the guy with the hour and a half long podcast episode. Anyway, yeah, I've learned over time that it's important not to be too judgmental because, I don't do this because I love the sound of my own voice. But I do know that it takes me a lot of words to get where I'm going sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, this guy may have been kind of the same thing, but I'd like to think that what you get here is a little bit more substantive than basically saying the same thing 75
Over and
times
over and
the way
over
that
and
this
over
guy
again.
did in that hour and a half.
I was absolutely beside myself, and I was like, I cannot come back here ever again. I'm done.
Yeah, it was weird because a couple of weeks earlier, I was kind of getting a good vibe off the place. It seemed like Liam was doing well in the Sunday school, whatever the kids program was that they had.
Yeah.
They had an interesting looking youth program that I had at least a surface interest in trying to get involved with a little bit.
Yeah.
It seemed like they had a little bit more of a finger on the pulse of what modern teenagers wanted than my home church did, and the structure that I had to work in when I was interning. There were a lot of things that I didn't like about the confining nature of what we were allowed to do with these kids because we had a pastor who was still living in 1955.
Right.
But this church seemed to be a little bit more relevant. They seemed to have things together a little bit more than average. And then that happened. Mm-hmm. And I thought basically the same thing that you did. If the senior pastor knew what this guy was about and endorsed what he was saying, then that means he agrees and he believes all this stuff too. So we're going to hear more of this shit over time. And it just didn't seem worth it to me either at that point. It really did not. So basically, the word faith movement encompasses a lot of different things. People look at it. Another word for this is prosperity doctrine, but it goes way beyond money. It goes way beyond just this one single concept. Shelle was just talking about the concept of sickness and wellness, and that word of faith methods can actually contribute to, or not contribute to, can influence whether or not you are sick, whether or not you have enough money in the bank, whether or not anything that is wrong in your life can be righted. It all falls under this cover of word of faith. And there are so many manifestations of this, both inside and outside of evangelical religion. And even though a lot of evangelicals will decry word of faith as being false doctrine, there are still certain things that most of them believe about this anyway, because it gets peppered into other areas of doctrine. Mm-hmm. So honestly, most of what is right here in this one package is dispersed throughout most evangelical doctrine. It's there, but it's more subtle.
Right.
So it's easier to take in smaller chunks. The whole idea of tithing ties right into this. And we did a whole episode on that. But the whole predication on tithing is that if you give that 10%, then you should see some kind of a return on it. And some preachers will say it's 3 times. Some will say 7. Some will say 10. But the simple fact of the matter is that it's the same kind of manifestation doctrine that permeates the word faith movement. And there are lots and lots of other examples too. But most evangelicals will look at this cluster of beliefs and say there's nothing to it. and yet they will still tithe.
Yeah.
And they'll do other things too that testify that they do believe in it. Now, I don't really fault them for this because of the way that it's presented and the way that it's snuck into all other kinds of areas of doctrine, because we're not taught as evangelicals to think about these things. We're taught to listen and we're taught to believe. So when you get this stuff in smaller chunks and you get it in different contexts, it looks different, but it's the same thing. This doctrine is all through evangelical religion, especially Pentecostal religion. Anything that has a real mystical edge to it is going to have this in it, and people will believe in it, whether they realize what it is that they're agreeing to and believing or not. They do believe in it, and that's the real sneaky part of this. In a way, you have to give credit to these people for taking all of this garbage doctrine and putting it in one place and exposing it for what it is, because in that context, taken in smaller bits and placed like Easter eggs in every other message that they hear, all of a sudden they believe it, but they don't realize they believe it, because when you mask it that way, it's a lot easier to swallow. It's kind of like trying to give my dog a pill, okay? He will never swallow that pill on his own, but if it's in a gob of peanut butter, he's going to eat it.
Yes.
Well, most evangelical doctrine is a big gob of peanut butter that you can hide anything in, and all of a sudden you've got people believing things that they don't even realize they believe, and it goes way beyond word of faith.
Oh, definitely.
But back to my notes a little bit. Faith in the context of this set of doctrines is not a belief that God will intervene. It's a belief that one can make God intervene through metaphysical means. Confess that something is so, and it simply is.
Right.
And that is as a matter of what they call the law of faith. You don't want to be healed. You are healed. You don't want financial help. You don't have financial problems. Just confess that you don't have financial problems and they will go away. Confess that you have all the money that you need to pay your bills and the money will just show up. You don't have to set up a Patreon. It'll just show up. So basically what this doctrine teaches is that all you have to do is confess that something is so, and God has to deliver. Yes, they believe that you can control God because God does not have autonomous will. As far as they're concerned, he's basically a machine that you run this stuff through, and out the other end comes what you want. Okay? The law of attraction is, and aka The Secret, is a secular carbon copy of this kind of thinking. And we're going to get into that a little bit more too, because we encountered this later on.
Yes.
And kind of fell prey to it, didn't we?
Oh, yeah,
we
tried.
totally did. So the next part of this, the real interesting part, is the concept of non-sovereignty, which goes right in lockstep with what I just said. God's will is basically non-existent. His will is governed by the law of faith. If you confess something as truth and put enough faith behind it, it must become true. There's only one problem. And I hate having to go to the Bible for counter arguments here, but this is what these people say is the all-authoritative word of God. And the all-authoritative word of God in this instance says something a little bit different than that. Romans 9:15 and 16 says, "For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." God seems to think he's in control here. Okay? So where they're getting this business about I can control God like a remote control and get him to do things like a puppet makes absolutely no sense. So verse 16 says, "So then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy." Period. End of story. It has nothing to do with what you're praying for, whether or not you can lock into the correct frequency that makes God do anything. It's always God's decision. That is quote unquote sound doctrine on this. If you want to take a traditional stand on belief in something like this, you're going to get traditional belief from Romans 9. You're not going to get it from Creflo Dollar. It's that simple. And speaking of, that was a great segue. He's next on my list. Creflo Dollar has this whole thing about us being little gods. Little g gods is what he calls them. And he and the convoluted logic that he puts behind this. Some of these people have gone as far as to say that other figures in the Bible represent God. There are a lot of word faith people who believe that Adam in the Garden of Eden was God, that he had to learn how to be human, that then they come up with all kinds of crazy shit, like that Adam could fly. Where do you get that? Where is that in the Bible? It is part of some word faith preachers' doctrine, though, that Adam was basically this supernatural being, but he was also a man. And that's where typology comes into play, too.
Right.
Because even, quote unquote, sound theologians have made the argument that Adam was a type of Christ. Now, for those of you who don't understand what that means, it's not a direct comparison. A type is a set of characteristics that fall in step with something else. So Adam being a type of Christ means that a lot of people, well, it means that some people believe that he possessed enough of the attributes of Jesus, that Jesus was kind of a reflection of that. So that's what we mean by that. In exegetical terms, that's what we mean by that. Faith to the average word of faith believer is a metaphysical force. Okay? Use the force, Luke. It's not that far off. It really isn't, because it involves basically getting on the same wavelength with God, and that kind of forms a bridge between where you are and where you want to be, or what you want and how you're going to get it.
Right.
So when you tune into that wavelength, all of a sudden it's mandatory for you to get what you want, because you have basically just tapped into this treasure trove that God has waiting for you. So all you really have to do is name it and claim it at that point. And before I get too far ahead, I want to talk about this. This was, and I've talked about it in passing before. When I was working in Christian radio, I was working with this one person who, in the middle of a meeting one time, decided that she was going to add her 2 cents about something related to healing or laying on of hands or whatever. And she sat there in that circle, all of us in the middle of a staff meeting at the radio station. She's like, if you really, really want to manifest things like healing, especially healing through the laying on of hands, first thing you want to do is raise your left hand up to heaven and put your right hand on the person. What does this do? It forms a conduit to the spirit realm and starts channeling that energy into the person using your faith as a conduit. And I just sort of sat there for a minute, and I think that she saw me give her some kind of a look, and she looks at me and says, "Did you have something to say?" I said, "Can you show me in the book of Acts where the apostles did this?"
Yeah.
Because I don't see anything biblical about this concept. It sounds kind of hocus pocusy to me. And that did not go over well at all. I said, why can't my faith be enough? I'm sorry, but raising that hand to form a conduit to the spirit realm really sounds to me like I'm performing some kind of work of righteousness to bring about something else. So are we saved by grace or not? Does God act according to grace or not? So then why are we forming conduits to the spirit realm? And I said, oh, and from a sitting position, you're doing this. Does that mean as soon as I stand up, my head is in the spirit realm? And she looks at me with all seriousness, and she's like, Joe, my head is always in the spirit realm.
Woohoo.
And I didn't doubt for a second that it was true, because there was something spacey going on in there. Now, I like this person. As a person, I liked her. I could work with her, but I never, especially at that point in my life, I was like in my early 20s and had zero filter and zero poker face. I heard that, and I'm certain that she saw my what the fuck face and just had to address it, because now she was embarrassed because I dared to disagree with her on this.
Yeah.
But what she said was pure word faith doctrine. And a lot of the people that were involved in that station had had similar beliefs too. And
Yeah.
again, it wasn't that they were word of faith believers. It was that they had bought into a lot of this through other areas of doctrine.
Right.
So what she was saying didn't sound that strange to anybody else in that circle. But that's just because no one else was thinking about it from the standpoint of reason or logic. That was always a problem for me.
Yeah.
Always a problem for me. And it created a lot of problems for me at that station too. This was less than a year before I was let go. And yes, I was let go from that position. On a later episode, I might get into why, because there are all kinds of other topics where that story would relate, and not the least of which being the whole concept of childlike faith. And I really want to do an episode on that and show what childlike faith does to your thinking. Another thing that I remember, one of the real long-term things that really pissed me off, and I'm not angry about it anymore, but I still find it irritating, and I find the attitude behind it very irritating, was when we were doing an outreach project. This was during my internship, and we were out in Warwick, New York, doing an outreach project, and we had a service the first night that centered on divine healing. And for the 99,000th time, I had people laying their hands on my feet. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before or not, but I was born with clubbed feet, had a bunch of operations to correct it. And as a teenager, it did slow me down quite a bit. But I had a lot of friends around me who had all kinds of faith and wanted to see me healed of this. And the one guy that was praying for me that night, I had talked to him about the surgical staples. He's like, before the night is out, you're going to be fishing those surgical staples out of your socks. This is not going to be a problem in your life anymore. You're going to walk out of this place with perfectly healed, perfectly functioning feet and ankles. Do you believe this? And I said, yes. Well, guess what? It didn't happen, because obviously it wasn't going to happen. And when this guy saw me the next day and saw that I was still kind of limping around, he kind of looked at me and shook his head in that accusing sort of way and said, you need to start manifesting a healing and quit blaming God for your disbelief. There's no reason why you still have to be in pain. None, except that you want to be in pain.
Oh, boy.
Now, I'm in the middle of my internship. I'm not going to get into it with this idiot, but at the same time, I'll tell you what, it was all I could do to keep myself from cold cocking the guy. It was just, I couldn't believe. It's like, could you maybe take that necessary mile walk in my shoes, in my very malformed, weird ass, foot conformed shoes, and see what I go through? And take a little bit of a closer look at my life and see that my life revolves around my faith. I have given my life to my faith. I mean, seriously, to be told that it was my fault that I was still in pain, I had the same reaction to it that you did when that guy suggested that if you're sick, it's your fault. And if you die of your sickness, it's your fault. It was the same stinking thinking coming out. Now I want to get into the most popular of these, and the most openly mocked part of this is the whole name it and claim it thing.
Yes.
There were Christian rock artists that covered this and basically wanted you to know that that it was bad doctrine. Steve Taylor, I bring him up a lot.
Yeah.
He had a song called "You Don't Owe Me Nothing," which was supposed to be a response to the whole word faith thing, the whole name it and claim it thing. And the words of that song are really good. It's too bad that he's such a homophobe. Yeah. And it's too bad that he has so many dyed-in-the-wool evangelical ideas about everything else, because he's one of those artists that I still like.
Yeah.
I just don't like his messaging very much. But he kind of got it spot on with that song. I recommend looking it up. It's called "You Don't Owe Me Nothing" by Steve Taylor. It's one of the better ones out there. And it's one of the moments of clarity that I see in Christian music. But most evangelicals reject this kind of thinking outright, which is a good thing. And it also says something about the doctrine itself. Even someone completely immersed in the Kool-Aid possesses enough reason to realize that word faith methodology works so seldom, and even so is purely coincidental when it does, that it doesn't even, it's not even worth considering. That's what most people will say on the surface about it.
Right.
But I have heard people talking about manifesting all kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
And people who will swear that they don't believe in this will still talk about that sort of thing. It's encouraging. It's encouraging that in certain contexts, their brains can see it.
Yeah.
It really is, because by all accounts, with the levels of indoctrination these people go through, they should be swallowing everything that they're told hook, line, and sinker. But there's something about this, when it is framed this way, that sets up a huge red flag. And that's nothing but good news. That one story was the biggest part of it for me. It was the most scarring thing that happened. And it was literally a 10-second interaction that all these years later I still remember. And I remember the smug tone in that guy's voice. Like, I spent all that time praying for you last night, and you just basically wasted my time because you don't have enough faith. Otherwise, you'd be holding those staples right now. And I mean, it was just, and I walked away from that not feeling bad at all. I walked away feeling angry because of how much faith I actually had put behind it that night, and all the faith that I had put behind it all of those times before when I asked for the same thing and didn't get it. There have been multiple instances of this where I've prayed in earnest for something and nothing happened, and it was always framed as, well, that's your fault.
Yeah.
Well, you know, at the time, it didn't really occur to me to come back at people with this one, but I would have loved to just turn on my heel and ask that guy who actually said that shit to me as I was walking away. He didn't even want to look at my face when he said that to me. He's saying it as I walked away. I wanted to turn on my heel and say, oh, really? What have you manifested lately? Let's see what your track record is. What have you managed to accomplish?
Yeah.
And this is on the heels of hearing stories about them having financial problems, having too many kids to support, and all of this stuff. It's like, okay, so you believe this. Where's your $1 million home? Where's your late model car? Where's the money to pay your bills? And I mean, I'm kind of sad that I didn't turn it around on him. But again, I was in a position where I had to be a little bit more pastoral.
Yeah.
I was a pastoral intern. So it wouldn't have looked good for me to get into conversations like that with somebody and start looking confrontational. So I just sort of let it roll off. But I mean, it was a lot of years ago, and I can still hear him in my head. I can still hear those words hitting the back of my head and just feeling so stung by what he was saying, because you have no clue what's going on in my head. I believed wholeheartedly. I had so many people around me. It's like there's power that's being generated by this. So many people that are so purposed, and they were very, 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 very purposed. Okay. These people cared about me. They wanted me to be whole. They wanted me to not be in pain. And these are all great things. They brought some great energy to that little gathering there, but that's all it was. It was good times and good feels, and that was it. And I walked away still with clubbed feet, still with staples in my ankle, because I didn't have enough faith. Let's talk a little bit about some of the people involved in this. I'm going to talk about the ones that I am most familiar with here. I think everyone knows who Joel Osteen is. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this. He's current. He's been in the news more than once, and it's very, very easy to pick apart what he has to say in these sermons. It's nothing but fluff doctrine and feel-good stuff that puts you in the mood to give money. Mm-hmm. That's really all it is. It sounds good. It's uplifting. It's motivating. This guy sounds smart. It's comforting listening to him. Sure, let's send him some money. Creflo Dollar, he's another one who is current, and he's the one who back in 2015 convinced all of his followers to buy him a $65 million Gulfstream G650 jet. And people gave, and they gave a lot. I talk every week about a bunch of people giving $5. Well, he was a little bit more aggressive than that. And he had people making quote unquote faith promises that probably put them behind on their mortgages, probably took food off of their tables, probably had all kinds of calamitous results for them, but this fucktard gets a $65 million jet. I can't wrap my brain around why it's even okay for even the local pastor to be driving around in an Escalade when the average parishioner is driving an 83 Civic. Okay. It really strikes a chord with me. Now, I've talked about this a little bit too, and the explanation that I got from my pastor did make a decent amount of sense. And he never struck me as the type that went for personal luxury over integrity.
Right.
But he was probably a very, very small minority, because when I was interning, I saw a fuck ton of Cadillacs in that parking lot.
Oh, yeah. There's always, like, the big Cadillacs were a big thing.
Yeah. They were a big thing in evangelical circles. They were a huge thing in Amway.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how many times were we driven to dream about Cadillacs?
Yeah.
And have them described and all of that? Well, I think far too many pastors drive luxury vehicles when their parishioners are driving Civics.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just another example of how this doctrine permeates.
Yeah.
Because my pastor even told me that this stuff was bunk, but he's kind of participating in it.
Yeah.
He was definitely participating in it, whether he realized it or not. I don't think that his motives were ulterior, but I do think that this thinking got so far into his head that he just didn't realize what he was actually doing or saying at that point.
Right.
And about this one thing. Oh my goodness. Here comes Benny Hinn. Oh, I need a moment, ladies and gentlemen. There's just something about this guy that has always almost physically repulsed me.
Yeah.
His methods and the Svengali kind of influence that he has over his, and I say his, followers, because these people, I refuse to believe that they're thinking even remotely about Jesus when they're looking to this guy for healing. Okay. Yeah. They're looking for healing, and they're seeing this guy as their savior, and that is how he postures himself. Mm-hmm. And he still does. Benny Hinn is a self-proclaimed faith healer. In case anybody doesn't know who this guy is, he's a self-proclaimed faith healer, but all of the evidence that there is out there shows that he can't do jack shit for people. The people who have been on his platform during his broadcasts for various healings usually have some kind of an ambiguous sort of ailment. Mm. They'll show up on crutches, or they'll show up in a wheelchair, or they will have stories about internal problems that you can't see. And now you are at their mercy to tell the truth as to whether or not anything happened when this guy lays his hands on him or does any of the other parlor tricks that he employs during one of his services. Those with paralysis and other debilitating conditions are often turned away, especially if the event is being filmed, and it's usually being filmed.
Yeah.
I still think that a lot of this guy's story is what the basis of that Steve Martin movie, Leap of Faith, was about.
Yes.
Now, if you've never seen that one, I highly recommend it too. The only problem that I have with it is that it really does push the theistic part of it toward the end, where there are a few unexplained manifestations, and this guy who was a self-proclaimed grifter and shyster winds up a believer at the end.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to give you the spoiler alert on that one, only because I just endorsed a movie that says things at the end that I absolutely do not agree with.
Right.
But the overall tone and the message of the movie, I think, is really good. Because I can remember one scene, the kid with the, I think he had polio, Lucas Haas. Remember him from Witness? Mm-hmm. A little bit older. And he played the kid with the actual real ailment. And after all of these people who were obviously planted in the audience came up and got quote unquote healed, this kid's mother was bound and determined to get this kid. I think the preacher's name in that movie was Jonas Nightingale.
Yeah, something like that.
And she was determined to get this kid in front of Jonas and have him heal him in front of everybody. She was a believer, and there were others that weren't and really wanted to see how this would pan out. Not going to spoil the rest of it, but if this was a Benny Hinn crusade, that's when the cameras would have turned off. And that's when some creative editing would have been happening. They wouldn't have ever let this kid near the stage.
Right.
They wouldn't never have let him close. And that has been their MO for a long time. They encourage people to come forward for healing, but they will never let you on that platform if you have a real problem. That's the thing, because it would be a game over situation.
Right.
Ever notice how when he starts going off on the whole slain in the spirit thing, how effective it is?
Yeah.
We talked about this before on the show. When you see a whole group of people just go down like dominoes like that, it's just a matter of no one in the audience wanting to look like they are unspiritual.
Yes.
How do I know? Because I've done it.
Yeah.
I have faked it. I have gone over, quote unquote, slain in the spirit when I wasn't, because I didn't want people to think that I lacked faith.
Right.
And it's the same thing here. Benny Hinn waves his jacket at you, and you go down like a ton of bricks. And they know it. I used to think that maybe hypnosis had something to do with it. Now I'm not sure. The jury is still out. The jury is out for me as to whether or not hypnosis is a thing. So,
Right.
It wasn't hypnosis. It was peer pressure. Especially when these people know that there are cameras on them. Mm-hmm. Whether their face will ever be seen clearly on that camera or not, they are not going to be the last man or woman standing.
Yeah.
Because then they will be singled out. So when the prayer blanket waves, when the sport jacket waves, whatever the fuck he's doing that night, when he starts doing it, people just comply. Because they don't want to be the one embarrassed on national TV as the most unspiritual person in the place.
Yeah.
And that is why he has remained so popular. He has the charisma to keep this going, and he understands human nature really, really well. And what he does works to the extent that it makes him a lot of money, but it doesn't help or change anybody's life. Kenneth Copeland was one of the first ones that I remember seeing on TV. I can remember kind of sort of hearing some of his stuff when I was a teenager. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him, but he's another one that likes expensive toys, particularly planes. And when you try to call him on the basic questions of why do you need something like that, not only does he skirt the question, it pisses him off. He doesn't want to talk about that at all. He will shut down the interview. He will walk away, and he's done it more than once. And whenever he's confronted about how he spends his parishioners' money, he always he turns angry, and then he clams up and walks away. And that has been his MO for years. That's all I need to know about the guy.
Yeah.
Because if you cannot defend taking people's money, and you can't defend what you are doing with their money, when you are living a lifestyle that is way beyond anything that they can ever hope for, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
And that was something that I also noticed. And as a matter of fact, I think that Kenneth Copeland was the guy that spurred on one of the big conversations that I had with my youth pastor about this. And that was when I got his opinion. I was relieved to learn that his opinion was in lockstep with mine. And that was that for a little while. But I started paying more attention to these people after this. Another one that I started paying a lot of attention to was Robert Tilton. Let's talk about this son of a bitch for a little while. Okay. Robert Tilton he's kind of like L. Ron Hubbard, where early on he had made all kinds of statements about how you can fool people into believing anything or following you into anything, and had even demonstrated this in controlled environments and areas. There are videos out there early on of this guy, and I believe it was his brother, but it was somebody else. And they were doing a healing service or something. It was something that involved a lot of laying on hands and speaking in tongues. It's been nothing but bunk and bullshit to him from day one. and he knows it. But God, is he good at what he does? He is so good at what he does that, I mean, I was watching him in the 80s.
Yeah.
Not for any serious purpose, mostly to just shake my head and say, thank God that's not me. Thank God I don't think that way. Thank God I follow the true gospel and not this guy's version of it. It was kind of like listening to a shock jock or something along those lines where you just sort of kind of want to see what he comes up with next. So in that regard, he's a really good marketer because he had to know that there were a lot of people out there that were watching him for that express purpose, and that there would be a good handful of them that would send him money just because they found him entertaining. So he was preying on the believers, but he didn't care where the money came from as long as he was entertaining enough people to keep them sending money. And the crazy behind what he asks people to do and the things that he does to keep you on the hook are just, I mean, even today, and I said before, the evangelical mindset doesn't change much. Well, this guy's MO hasn't changed in at least 30 years. He's still sending out the trinkets. He's still sending out the swaths of prayer blankets. He does all of this stuff, and all of it with the request for more money. John Oliver, I believe, did an episode on this once that you can go to YouTube and find, where he talks about several of the word faith people, including Robert Tilton. I spent a lot of late nights watching a lot of episodes of this guy's show. And I have to say, he's one of the best at what he does. And that's not a compliment, by the way. Not even remotely a compliment. He is definitely a major part of the problem. Not so, well, you know, not so much these days. But in the 80s, when Word of Faith was kind of a staple on television, that was pretty much all you were seeing. They were all Word of Faith. But this guy had a particular charisma, and he had a particular gall that I personally found entertaining. And boy, oh boy, did Robert Tilton, he still does. Boy, oh boy, does he have gall. I mean, some of the things that he asks people to do, some of the ways that he guilts people into sending him money, it's nothing but pure gall. Oh, yeah. And I don't think I've ever seen anybody who had it to the degree that this guy has. Who else is on this list? Round and round we go. Okay, so I think I'm going to kind of. Oh no. There's a couple more here. Let's talk about a couple of these people. Let's talk about Paul Crouch. Ugh. Now, I think I mentioned this a few minutes ago. I met this guy on a couple of occasions because where we lived in New York, there was a satellite TBN TV station where I had done some work because I had broadcasting experience. I actually did paid and unpaid work there. And there was one night in particular where I was just working as an usher. I wasn't doing anything with production. I was just working the door. And I had been told to hold the crowds outside until I was told, 10, 15 minutes before the show was going to start, they were going to start letting people in and sit down. Well, that particular night, Paul Crouch was at the station. And he comes out, opens the door. Now, keep in mind that he's got a whole crew of people that are trying to get his show on the air. A live show, I might add, on the air. And there was a reason why people were being asked to wait outside. Well, Paul Crouch, being the head of this organization, flings the door open and says, "Who's telling you people that you have to stand outside like this? This guy? Come on in. Come on in." And everybody goes inside. And this prick walks up to me, grabs me by my arm, and says, "Who do you think you are not letting these people inside?" And I looked at him. I said, "First of all, I don't care who you are. Get your hands off me." I said, "Second of all, maybe you should talk to your staff. I'm a volunteer here tonight. I was asked to come here to help. So I was doing what I was asked to do. You can go talk to," and I gave the name of the person because that was the person who had these people standing outside, not me. But the simple fact that he was such a prick and that he put his hands on me. And you know what? I didn't feel healing energy flowing through me at that moment.
Oh, no.
I didn't feel anything that even remotely, that was even remotely like love. I saw this guy for what he was. And honestly, it was one of the early steps toward me getting unbound, because he puts on such a face, or did put on such a face in front of his audience. But that is what you got when you got him one-on-one.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine that it was a common thing, that these people wore many faces depending on the context of what they were doing and who they were with and who was listening. Okay. Mm-hmm. I was done with TBN after that.
Oh, yeah.
I did not take any more assignments there, even if they were paid. And I did not want to run into this guy again. I was actually amazed that I wasn't removed from the property after that. But I actually went back inside and continued doing my job for that night and tried to forget that that had happened. Well, it's been a good number of years and I still remember. So, I didn't really succeed in that. And another thing that I can remember about that night, his son, Matt Crouch, remember him? Host of Real Videos.
Oh, God. Yeah.
That show that I would stay up late for and watch and then switch over to Headbangers Ball after. True story.
Yep.
I could hear this guy. There was a lady in the audience with an infant, and the baby started crying during a live broadcast. And Matt Crouch was the producer that night. I swear, from 10 feet away, I could hear this guy screaming in one of the stagehands' headsets, "Get her out! Get her out right now!" Screaming at the top of his lungs. I'm amazed that they couldn't hear it up on the soundstage.
Wow.
I'm amazed that it didn't come out over the air. He was so loud and so angry and so rude. I said, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? So I got its ace to Dad. I got a taste of Sonny Boy. And then I just got its taste of, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
I finished out the night because this had been, this was something that I had done for our senior pastor. He had approached me and asked if I would be willing to do it. Out of respect for him, I decided I was going to finish out the night. But after that, there were a couple of other things that were coming up. I went into his office after and I told him, look, I really don't want to do anything else at TBN. I have my reasons why, but we're going to leave it at that. I never told him what happened between me and Paul Crouch.
Right.
I never told him what I heard when we were inside. But I'll tell you what, Trinity Broadcasting Network is run by those kinds of people.
Yep.
They have no love or care for anyone unless you've got an open wallet and you're willing to fling them some money. And it's been that way pretty much from the beginning. Trinity is as word of faith as they come, and all they care about is money. And even to this day, every now and then I'll come across TBN, just flipping through the channels, and I will see TBN. It hasn't changed. The way that they do things hasn't changed at all. The messaging hasn't changed at all. The faces change, but only because pigs like Paul Crouch are dead. Okay. And the messaging is still there, and it's just as unnerving as it ever was. And just remembering those things that I experienced make it that much worse to hear what they do and how they do it and how they put on the face and how they pull out the I love yous so liberally. We love you so much, and here's what we're going to do for you if you send us whatever your faith gift is going to be this month. We want to do something for you too. So there was always a trinket. My grandmother had a box full of them.
Of course.
Because I'll tell you, she gave money to everybody. She gave money to everybody. And even after that, even after I went home and told her what happened, she blew it off like, well, he's got a stressful job. And he does this, and he travels all over, and he does that. He was a little stressed out. And that, I think, is probably all that was wrong there. I don't think that he was angry at you. I don't think that he meant anything by it. Oh, he meant it. That's the type of person that he was.
Yeah.
God rest his soul. moving right along. Yeah, let's get away from Paul Crouch. That's a sore spot for me because that happened. He's also the only one of those that I ever really, I think, met face to face.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I was in the room with several more because they came through Faith Assembly. There were a few that came through Faith Assembly in the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in the same room with them, but I never interacted with anyone but Paul Crouch, and that was more than enough. Oral Roberts. Oh my God, let's talk about the man that God held ransom. Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah. It's like
He needed to raise, I don't remember how much money it was.
it was like $10 million.
$8 million, $10 million.
Or
or
God
the
is
Lord,
going to call me home.
yes, or God is going to call me home. This even got a mention in a Steve Camp song a few years later. One man claimed God held him ransom. If he didn't get enough, he'd die.
Yeah.
And that was Oral Roberts. So, even in mainstream Christian rock, there were people that had things to say about this, and none of them were complimentary.
No.
And in terms of what I was talking about before with other doctrine kind of overshadowing this, I could not find a single person. I couldn't find a single person in my circle, in my church, anywhere who thought that this was anything but batshit insane.
Yeah.
Okay? No one took it seriously. Even my grandmother, who thumbed money at everybody. And if they tugged at her heartstrings just a little bit, she would thumb them even more. Even she knew that this guy was full of shit and stopped. She was sending him money. She was sending him money and stopped after this.
Yeah.
That's how much of an aversion
Yeah.
some of their own people have to some of their shenanigans. But I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg with this guy. He was also one of the earlier ones that I can remember seeing on TV. There was him. There was Kenneth Cole. I remember seeing him a lot. These were not really the pioneers, but they were the ones that had risen in the ranks. There were others. Rod Parsley, Peter Popoff. These are names that I am familiar with, but don't remember a whole hell of a lot about.
Right.
Who doesn't know who Jimmy fucking Swaggart is?
Oh, jeez.
Come on now. I have sinned against you. And that on the heels of all kinds of preaching against the same things that he was called out for.
Right.
All kinds of sexual. What's the word I'm looking for here? He was found out. I don't want to say deviancy because no. I'm not, to each his own. You can live however you want to live and live your sex life the way you want to live your sex life. But when you are when you're a televangelist with an international audience and you sit there and decry the very things that you're doing behind closed doors, that's a problem. And he did lose a lot of his base. And I mean, I'm sorry. He kept up the penitent act for a very, very long time. It never wavered. And it was always the same rhetoric over and over and over again. And he kept coming back to it because the people that were faithful to him, the people who decided to forgive him, were the ones who also felt sorry for him. Right. And if they felt sorry for him, what did that mean they were very likely to do? They were likely to continue supporting him financially. Right. So he kept the penitence angle going for a really, really long time after that. Yeah. And eventually he managed to build up his fan base again. And I don't hear about him much these days. As a matter of fact, it's been years since I've heard about him at all. I mean, I hear his name once in a while, but that's it.
Yeah.
I don't think he's doing anything noteworthy. Jim Baker, on the other hand, next one on the list. We've talked about him a couple of times on this show, so I'm not going to get too far into it. But he's turning into more and more of a crackpot every year. He's going further and further down the rabbit hole every year. Oh, yeah. And now he's expanding his reach way beyond evangelical circles and trying to tout all kinds of crazy products and whatnot. We've talked about his stuff twice so far on the show, so I'm going to kind of let that go. The rest of these guys I'm kind of scrolling through, and not a whole lot that I'm terribly familiar with in terms of what they've had to say about anything, but I certainly know who Joyce Meyer is. Who was the one that we talked about a couple of weeks ago? There was another one. What was her name?
Paula White.
Paula White, yeah. She's another one. And there have been actually, I shouldn't say recently, but there was, I think, probably sometime in the early to mid 90s, there was a big upsurge of female Word of Faith preachers
Yeah.
that had their own ministries. It wasn't even like Kenneth Copeland's wife. I forget what her name is now. But when she came out to talk, she was kind of riding the heels of her husband's ministry.
Right.
There were several who basically marketed their stuff under their own brand. And this was done for the express purpose, I believe, of tapping into the female market and trying to get more bored evangelical housewives to send money. That's really what it sounds like it boiled down to, because there was a lot in what some of these, and still is, in what a lot of these female Word of Faith preachers have to say, that basically guilt women into traditional roles.
Yes.
And adhering to traditional roles. And when they don't, it's a point of guilt.
Yes.
And when you've got people feeling guilty and you show them a better way and they appreciate your insight and helping them make their own lives a little bit better, what are they more apt to do?
Give money.
They're apt to give you money. It all comes back to the same thing. So in a weirdly ironic sort of way, I think that what they have to say is true when it comes to their own personal benefit, because they did manage to figure out a way to tap into a conduit that is loaded with cash.
Yeah.
And that conduit is your emotions and your conscience and your sense of guilt and your sense of appreciation when someone pushes those pain points on you for an hour and then provides you with this solution that involves giving them your money.
Right.
Hey, it's a solution. So now they're thinking a little bit more about it. They're more open to the idea of giving money to this person because they have, quote unquote, solved a problem for them.
Right.
And now there's appreciation and gratitude. Okay. And some of them even frame it like that. You know, if you appreciate what we're doing and if you appreciate what God wants to do in your life, then here's how you make it happen. And it always involves sending the money. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I get on this podcast every week and say, if you appreciate what we're doing, then consider supporting us. But here's the thing. If I take money from somebody, I'm going to be accountable for it. And I'm not going to be buying jets. Okay.
No.
I'm not even going to be buying a bicycle because it has nothing to do with the work that I do. I may buy a new microphone, or I may buy sound dampening equipment for the inside of the studio, or whatever it is I want to do. But there's going to be accountability for it. I'm not going to be going out and lavishing myself with stuff.
No.
Because a few faithful people who believe in what I'm doing decided to give me money. And that's precisely what these people do. And it's more than a few. It's way more than a few people. And they convince people to give way beyond their means, which is that's Robert Tilton's thing right there.
Yeah.
He unabashedly asks people to send in obscene amounts of money.
Oh, yeah.
Obscene amounts of money. We're talking like someone's entire Social Security check. Mm-hmm. And they do it.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part. They do it. Gene Scott, another one who likes to toe that line.
Yeah, he's
and
on
we
the
had
radio,
friends.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had, I don't know about now, but he had his own radio network. You remember we had friends out in New York whose mother was so into this guy that she had a satellite out in her backyard so she could pick him up.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the express purpose of hearing Gene Scott.
Yeah.
This is a guy who would basically charge $20 for an 8x10 glossy of himself.
Yeesh.
Okay. You send him $10 or $20 and he'll send you this 8x10 glossy. Now, another thing that I can say about this guy that I sort of I don't want to use the word respect or admire. I don't know what word fits here, but there's something about a guy that sits there and tells you that he's going to go out and buy fancy cars and party with Playboy bunnies and all of that stuff. He literally told his quote unquote faithful that these were the types of things he was going to do with their money, and these idiots kept supporting him. Behold the power of the cult of personality.
Yep.
That's
Definitely.
all I have to say about that. Because even with full disclosure of I'm going to misuse these funds, I'm going to squander them, and I'm going to feed my own vices with them, people still kept sending him money.
He's an honest crook.
Yeah. Yep. These creatures exist. And creature, that's a great way of describing Gene Scott. I'm amazed he's not on this list. I'm looking at, and I'm sure that I'm missing others that I could be bringing up only because, they're not right here in front of me right now. And hopefully I would think that the other part of that is that I put a lot of it out of my mind. He's been gone for a while.
Yeah.
Right up to the very end, this guy was grifting people and fleecing them and telling them that he was going to do bad things with their money, and they kept sending it to him anyway. And I mean that to me takes a particular talent. So let me get back to my notes here. I want to use this last section to take this concept beyond the walls of your average evangelical Pentecostal church, because it's not a new concept. It is not one that is unique to evangelical Christianity. It's actually much older than most evangelical faiths. And before it was called Word of Faith doctrine, and long before this stuff was called Word of Faith doctrine, it was called something else. And that something else is the law of attraction.
Yeah.
Okay? The law of attraction is the secular version of this, but not really, because they even go so far as to say that all these verses in the Bible that talk about God relate directly to the greater universe.
Right.
So you can ask the universe for things that you want, and because the universe is a living, breathing entity, it listens and it obeys. You see the parallel there. It's like with Word Faith doctrine, you have the law of faith.
Right.
And the law of faith is identical to the law of attraction. It's just that the law of faith has God at its center.
Right.
Whereas the law of attraction has the universe at its center. Mm-hmm. But they will tell you that these things are one and the same.
Right.
And show you things in the Bible that prove that these things are one and the same.
Right.
And if you watch the movie The Secret, there's a whole section on this where they break down, well, when the Bible talks about God, it says this, 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 and this. Well, the universe is capable of this, 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 and this. So that's really what they're talking about there.
Right.
They tried to take it out of a spiritual context and say, hey, you know what? You don't need religion for this. Mm. All you need to do is believe that things can happen, and they will happen. And we definitely fell prey to this.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
It was a major part of what we believed when we were in Wicca. And the funny thing is, I wasn't stupid. My brain didn't go on vacation there, because I knew, and I said out loud when we were in Wicca that this is basically name it and claim it.
Right.
Now, do you remember how I justified it? How I justified believing in it after we were out of that environment? I justified believing in the law of attraction because it took the spiritual angle out of it.
Right.
It was still metaphysical, but metaphysical and spiritual are different things.
Right.
So I just decided that it was safe to believe in this version of it because I didn't have to rely on God to do the second half.
Right.
All I had to do was decide where I wanted that parking space to be, and it was going to be there. Now, oddly enough, it happened a few times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Coincidences are like that. They happen.
Yeah.
And, the fact that we found parking in difficult places had nothing to do with the fact that I was visualizing an empty parking space close to where I wanted to park. It was the result of someone else pulling out of a parking space a couple seconds before I showed up. And that's as mystical as it gets.
And maybe us leaving the house maybe 15 minutes earlier to get a good parking space.
Yeah, there's that too. Because like I've said before, when you pray about things, you start at least subconsciously doing things to bring about what you want to have happen.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the law of attraction. You just start unconsciously shifting things around.
Right.
And also assigning meaning to things. Because I can remember also in The Secret movie, the movie about The Secret, I can remember there was one part where one of these people was talking about how he visualizes parking spaces and like specific parking spaces in a parking lot that he knows.
Right.
And within a couple of spaces of what I'm thinking, I always find a parking space. Well, okay. All that means is that you got there at the right time.
Right.
Now, they never talk about the number of times they try and manifest these things and it doesn't work.
Right. No, of course not.
I did all kinds of manifesting with the law of attraction and got things because I was also performing other actions to bring them into my life.
But they also say that in the audiobook of The Secret, I remember hearing the author say that you'll be inspired to do things that will bring this into your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so that's your kind of like, okay, this is my safeguard. You know, you just didn't do that inspired work action that you were supposed to do when you got inspired to do it.
Right, right. So the universe was trying to give you something and your apathy and inaction kept it from you.
Right.
Yeah. So, and any kind of negative thought whatsoever, because if you listen to these crackpots, the universe doesn't understand no.
No.
It's like the abusive boyfriend doesn't understand the concept of no. So everything has to be a positive. You can't tell the universe what you don't want.
Yeah,
you have to tell the universe what you want. You can't tell the universe, I don't want to go bankrupt, because it doesn't understand negatives. And it will just hear, I want to go bankrupt, and you'll go bankrupt.
Yeah.
That was the way that they framed it. So yeah, they take it a couple steps beyond what you see in evangelical circles, but it's still the same foundation.
Right.
All of the same stuff is there. And the accusatory nature of it when it doesn't work is still there. It's just that they take it to a whole new extreme with all of this. Okay, now it has to be a positive angle. Because I don't remember ever hearing that in church.
Right.
I heard that when I saw this. And, I think this was another part of it that made me believe that there could be something more to it, because there were more intricacies to it. There was more personal responsibility. There was more thought involved in it. And I believed that made this version of it more valid. Forgiving the fact that pretty much everything else was completely identical, and I had spent years telling myself that it was bunk, all of a sudden in this context it makes sense.
Right.
Because it was more about me. It was more about personal responsibility to make these things happen. And it felt like it made more sense. It really didn't, never will. But that was where my head was when I was in Wicca.
Right.
And I had been taught that I had power. And it was the first time that I had been taught that I had power.
Right.
Because up to that point, it is no longer I that liveth, but Christ which liveth within me. And now I'm being told that as a witch,
right,
I have the power.
Right.
So it comes from me. All I have to do is take it. All I have to do is receive it. All I have to do is make it happen. And I'm making it happen. I'm not relying on God. So it was more attractive. It was a different container for the same thing. And it just made sense to me in the mindset of a fledgling Wiccan that this version of this kind of thinking was more practical. Yeah, I know. And it just put more of the power in my hands.
right.
Okay. But if you listen to Word Faith Doctrine, that power has always been in my hands, because if I tap into that right energy and I have the right amount of faith, then God has to do what I'm asking him to do. So it's really the same thing. It's just the way that it's framed, the way that it's packaged in a more secular way, and in a way that shifts the balance of power a little bit. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem like the same thing, but it is. And just to give you a little bit of a background on this, the law of attraction is not something that came out as part of The Secret.
Right.
The law of attraction is a much older term, going back to what people believe to be 1877, where it appeared in print for the first time in a book written by, let's see if I get the name right, Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian occultist who had all kinds of ideas about attracting power and the power that exists between different manifestations of spirit.
Right.
And that meant that the human spirit connecting with the divine, which is the exact same thing that evangelicals, particularly evangelical Pentecostals, will equate with you finding that frequency and making God do your will. Kind of an arrogant sort of thing for people who need to be saved from their own sins.
Yeah.
But there you have it. But again, these ideas aren't mainstream in that one homogenous package. They're not mainstream. They've always been out on the fringes, regardless of how many people you see in those mega churches. It's still a fringe sort of niche.
Right.
That just happens to tickle a lot of people's ears. Okay? But the numbers of people that you see, even in Joel Osteen's church and some of these others with their mega churches, there's still a very, very, very small minority of the number of evangelicals that are out there.
Right.
I mean, I don't care if you have to take 50 smaller churches or 500 smaller churches to get the numbers that you get in one of these mega churches. There's still more of them. And there's still more people out there that understand that this is bullshit than there are who actually believe it. You wouldn't believe it by the numbers. I mean, come on, Creflo Dollar raised $65 million. He's got a few followers, okay? Yeah. He's got a few people who believe in him. But the vast majority of the people who are sitting in the pew next to you on Sunday are going to tell you that this is nothing but a crock of shit. Right. Well, they won't use that terminology because they're in church. But that's what they're going to be believing.
Yes.
Okay? The law of attraction concept is rooted in ideas that come from various philosophical and religious traditions. In particular, it has been inspired by Hermeticism, Transcendentalism, specific verses from the Bible, and Hinduism. So a lot of Eastern influence. What are those verses from the Bible? Well, there's two that came immediately to mind for me, and I know that there are more, but these are the two that I found, that I remembered, and then just looked up the reference for. The first one is John 14:14, which basically is Jesus saying you can ask for anything in my name and it'll be done.
Right.
That's the truncated message in that verse. That's not a direct quote. It's a paraphrase. And then there's Philippians 4:19, again, a paraphrase, but probably a little bit closer, where it says, my God shall supply all of my needs according to his riches and glory through Christ Jesus. So these verses, among others, are used as proof that this kind of thinking is sound and justifiable.
Right.
But long before there was a word of faith movement, these verses were being used as proofs because, look at this, in an authoritative religious text, it says this, so it must be true.
Right.
So the bottom line is that it's not true. And most people sitting in the pews understand that it's not true. Most people who keel over at a Benny Hinn crusade understand that it isn't true. So where do we go with this? What do we do with the knowledge of what this doctrine is and the damage that it can cause? Because people hand over their paychecks to these people, sell their cars to meet their faith promises. They raise their hands in the middle of church services, agreeing to give $1,000, $10,000. They stand up, they walk down. I saw this happen at least once, where people were coerced into making decisions to give insane amounts of money. And I saw a couple of my friends, my teenage friends, on that platform. They had decided and determined that they were going to give $1,000 to these people. And I never approached any of them or tried to call them out on it because I understood that they were good intentioned.
Yeah.
I understood that they were very, very well intentioned in the decisions that they were making. And I just looked at them being on that platform as a means of them showing their support. Because I don't think that a lot of those people were able to ever afford that $1,000. And I never saw any of my friends doing car washes outside their house to pay their faith promise. Never saw any of that.
Yeah.
So honestly, I think a lot of that just went by the wayside after, when it became apparent that there was no way they were ever going to be able to keep that promise.
Right.
They just decided to give up on it, I'm sure. But no one ever talked about it. And I'm sure it had to be embarrassing. Because the question there is, where's the money going to come from? And if you're relying on faith, then obviously it's not going to come from anywhere.
Right.
So I'm sure that of the people that were on that platform that night, that there were a few that did what they needed to do to pay that faith promise.
Yeah.
But I'm certain that the numbers were small. And for the 50 people that were on that platform, I'm certain that they would have been happy to have just 5.
Yeah.
I think $5,000 for a couple of hours work is pretty damn good.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So if they even got just 10% of those people to keep their promise, and in marketing terms, they couldn't even expect that. Only about 3% of the people, 3 to 5% of the people that were on that platform had a snowball's chance in hell of keeping that promise, and they knew it. But it's a good return.
Yeah.
In marketing terms, 3 to 5% is actually a good response. So of all the people on that stage, they made a fraction of what was represented, but I'm certain that it was enough for them.
Yeah.
They wanted 50 so they could find 5. We have arrived at the part in the episode where I shift my attention to the listener. And I just want to tell you guys, it's real easy to get roped into this stuff. Even knowing what I knew about it, when I switched religions, I adopted a different version of it. It's easy to get ensnared. And a lot of times I think we get ensnared in it, not because we're selfish and because we want things, we want material things. We just want our lives to be a little bit better. You want your life to be better? If you don't like your job, start looking for another one. If you're not making enough money, there are ways to make more. There are ways to make more, not manifest more. You manifest it by doing what you need to do to bring it into your life in the first place.
Right.
I have 3 sources of income right now. I have my full-time job. I work as a freelance copywriter. And once in a blue moon, I give a driving lesson or 2. But I understand that if I need more money, I can't just open up my hands or form a conduit to the spirit realm and ask for it. I have to write another article. I have to give another driving lesson. I have to sell more weed legally in my state through the dispensary that I work for. Little disclaimer. I have to do these things because without them, the money is not going to show up. And that's just the way it is. I can't pray for more money to show up. I have to make it. I cannot pray for better health. I have to go to my doctor and I have to keep up with my health. And if things are not right, I have to do what I need to do to make them right. I couldn't pray away those kidney stones. Okay? I had to go to the ER and have someone take care of me and provide me with what I needed for that stone to pass with as little pain as possible.
Yeah.
But I couldn't pray it away. There's nothing, and no one laying their hands on me would have made that go away either. Because I don't care how many conduits you form to the spirit realm, this is a physical problem and it requires a physical solution. So for those of you who are listening and have been taken in by any manner of this kind of doctrine, even after proclaiming out loud and loudly that you don't believe in it, you know what? It's woven into the tapestry of all the other doctrine that you're force-fed on Sundays. It's in there. It's going to get in there one way or another. I thought that I had that whole thing nailed down, and when I switched religions and became a Wiccan, all of a sudden, in this context, it seemed okay. Those thoughts get in there, and they dig in deep, and they take root. And that is why we are doing what we're doing here. That's why we're here for you to basically expose all of this stuff and explain it. It's like I tell my students in the car. A lot of instructors will stop what they do at turn right, turn left, stop at the stop sign. I explain why. Why do I have to stop at the stop sign when it's 10 feet away from the edge of the intersection? Why can't I just drive past the stop sign to where I can see? Well, the stop sign is there for a specific reason. It's there to get you to stop and then slowly creep up to where you can see. Now, if you're doing things by the rules, that's how it gets done. And you know what? When I explain to my students that that's why they should do it, they start doing it because it makes sense. It's not just a matter of what, it's a matter of why. So it's not a matter of what you believed here. It's a matter of why you believed it. And you believed it because you were being fed it in small doses in pretty much every sermon you ever heard. and you were being fed it in small doses in every song that you ever listened to on Christian radio or in your Christian CD collection. These concepts permeate everything. And even though you'll have a hard time finding a large quorum of evangelicals who will say that they believe wholeheartedly in word of faith, you'll have a very small quorum of evangelicals who will admit that they believe in word of faith doctrine. Most of them believe it from different angles and in different contexts. Don't fault yourself for falling prey to it. You are taught to believe that these things are true, even from the mouths that tell you that it's not, because it's been so ingrained in them that it's under their radar too. They tout this kind of doctrine without even realizing that they are touting it. And like I've said before, don't get down on the people that taught you this. Get down on the people that taught them, and the people who taught them, and the people who taught them, because it goes back a long, long way. The first time we heard the term the law of attraction was in 1877. Okay? That's how far back the foundations of all of this go. You can't compete with that. All you can do is expose it. And once you start breaking it down in your own mind, it all starts looking really absurd, no matter what kind of face you put on it, no matter how you package it. It just doesn't make any sense anymore, because your brain stops accepting things and it starts analyzing things. And when that's happening, when you start questioning these things and you start seriously asking yourself, how much of this is valid? How much of this am I really supposed to believe? How much of this really makes sense? You know what's happening at that moment when those thoughts get in there? It is clear and definite evidence that your mind is working in a direction that is going to take you out of this place of belief and bring you to a place where you are truly, once and for all, unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.